Gonna go step by step how to take apart the pool table, store it, organize it, so that my brother-in-law can put it back together at his new home and not call me kicking, screaming, saying that he doesn't know how to put it together. Good luck, Frank. So a couple tools that we're gonna need, your standard tools. So we've got hammer, some needle nose pliers, a couple small crowbars, some tack pullers, socket adapter, 1/2 inch socket wrench, and different size of sockets. Box, that's where we're gonna put all of our nuts and bolts. A couple different size of Ziploc bags and snacks. One thing that's an absolute must. Here we go. Sharpie. A must. Okay, one of the first things to take apart and last things to put in place is the pockets. These are nice loose leather pockets, and they're all tacked one piece at a time underneath on this wood piece. So that's one of the last things that goes on. So we got to take all these tacks off first, and then the pocket's gonna hang loose because the pocket is connected to the rail with these metal pieces here, and you can't take these off until you unbolt the rail. And the rails have 3 bolts. 1, 2, 3. You gotta unbolt these to take the rails off. So we're gonna start with that. Yeah, definitely a lot easier to just grab some needle nose pliers, get a good grip on it, yank them out. Now when you're putting these back together, we can zoom out here, make sure you're using a narrow crown staple, not a nail. It has to be a narrow crown staple or else it'll go right through the leather. So now we got all the pockets taken apart. So when you're putting it back together, the pockets slide up under here, put a little tack in each piece, get the pieces lined up how you want, and put a little narrow crown, 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch staple up in each piece, all the way around. Then the tarp itself has a couple little staples in the corners, in the little pieces at each pocket. You got to do those first when you put the tarp down, and then you put the pocket over top. So now that we got these disconnected, now we've got to come in and take these little pieces off with 1/2 inch socket. 1-2 1/2 inch. So now we got all the bolts off all of these bumpers. Now these are all loose. All the bolts are labeled bumpers to table. When you're reinstalling it, put all the bumpers loose, put all the pockets in loose, get them in place, get the bolts in by hand loose, get everything lined up, and then slowly go around the table, tightening the bolts one at a time. So the pockets have another little bolt that is right up there, and this bolt connects the bumper to the rod, metal rod from the bumper. You have to take these out. There's one at each corner. So you've got 6 times 2, you've got 12 of those before you can be able to take the bumpers off. So put the bumpers on first, loose, then put the pockets on loose, put these bolts on, then put these bolts on for the bumpers themselves. So when you're putting the bumpers back together, leave your bumpers loose on the table. This bolt has to go through this little hole but inside the bumper. So place one pocket in one of the bumpers, put your bolt in, slide it in place with the other end in the other bumper, then come back around, put the other bolt in the other one. It's easier to do one at a time than move them over. All the bolts are labeled pocket to bumpers. They're still 1/2 inch, but they're a little bit smaller. Don't get them mixed up with bumpers to table bolts. The other ones are longer. Okay, so when you're putting the bumpers back together with the pockets, the two long ends have two pieces and they're all labeled. So the first one is at the top, that's labeled number 1, head of the table. That's the foot. And then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Same thing as the frame below. So when you get to putting these two together, put 2 and 3 side by side, then put one of the side pockets in place. So slide it in, bolt goes right there. Slide this guy in, the bolt goes right there, and then you can flip the whole thing over and put it in place loosely. Then you can connect your corners. So now that the bumpers are off, this is what you get. The tarp with all the cutouts, and it's held together at the pockets. Tarp flips underneath and it just has little 1/4 inch narrow crown staples and all the way around. Got staples every inch. Now we gotta take all these off. When you're putting it back together, you really have to go from the middle, pull it tight, put one staple, have somebody on the other side put their staple, and then work your way around. That's a whole process in itself, and there's a lot of YouTube videos on this. That's how I learned how to do this one. So I suggest you do pause and go find an actual installation video that'll show you how to install the tarp. Because I can't do it on this video because I won't be putting it back together. When it's time to put it back together, the tarp, it's got a labeled head. So that's got to match your bumper and it's got to match the frame that's labeled head, and then everything else will line up. Okay, so now that the tarp's all disconnected and all the staples are off of the sides of the tarp, you want to just fold it up so that you can store it. Fold it in the middle. On both ends. And then fold it again in the middle. Now your tarp's ready to store. When you put the tarp back on, you're going to want to use the tarp spread out and wipe across the entire slate area, get rid of all the dust, and then shake the tarp off. Okay, so now this is the finished product of the slates. Once there's 3 pieces. When you're done shimming them, you need to melt some beeswax in the cracks, and to fill up these 2 screw holes here and 2 more holes on the other side. And this is what gives you a perfectly smooth surface. And by the time you're done, you should be able to take your cue ball and roll it and not have any bumps. When you're doing your leveling, if the ball rolls across, it should not do a tuck. It should be nice and smooth. See? So now taking it apart, I'm gonna have to scrape the beeswax out of here to get these 2 screws off, and those two, and these 2. And the other screws you have to take off are not the pocket screws, it's only the screws that are along the edge, because this is one piece, and when you put these screws in, it wedges everything together. So you need to take these screws off. When you're putting it back together though, I would say put these edge screws on and then do the middle ones, because you're going to need to put shims underneath the slates. So once you've got these screws off, these under pieces that hold the two slates together, they're labeled the same way. So head, that one stays because it's bolted to the frame. 2, 3, foot, 5, 6. Screws for these guys are all in the bag labeled slate to frame. Now, depending how good of a leveling job you do on the frame, it'll change how much shimming you have to do underneath the slate pieces, because it has to be perfectly level. So the more time you spent on the frame, the less time you're going to spend shimming underneath. So I've got get a box of door shims. I've got one here. I've got just the end piece of another one there. And I know I've got a lot more bigger ones on the other side because I didn't do that good of a job. But at the end of the day, shims are your friend. Once you get to the fine tuning, you could actually use a deck of playing cards for shims, and then you can even use just strips of paper to really get the fine tuning adjustment. So here's an example of leveling. This is the middle piece right here. It's sitting on the frame. And at this end, I had to use a few shims to get it off. So you've got some space there in between the two. Should have probably put another shim in here. But if you level your frame better, you won't have to do as much shimming.
There. Geez, you took out a lot of staples. That's a lot.
Okay, so now we're down to the frame. So these cross pieces are labeled head with the arrow. This cross piece says foot going to the foot, and then the footboard. They have a couple half-inch bolts going this way, and then the other ones are half-inch bolts going in that way. These are labeled cross piece to frame. Now, once you're at the frame, you've got these little corner trim pieces here. They're just screwed in by a tiny little screw right there from the inside. So once you've got your side frame pieces on, you can put this trim piece on, screwed in from the inside. And the last obvious thing to take apart is the frame to the post. So they're all labeled foot number 4 goes to post 4, post 5 goes to frame 5. Do that in reverse to put it together. Start with this.